If you've watched my first 3 videos, you now know the basics of mindfulness and conscious autosuggestion. A few years ago, when I started practicing mindfulness, I found it so beneficial that I wondered whether I really needed to continue conscious autosuggestion, which I had already practiced for 20 years. But practicing both side by side, I realized they worked in very complementary ways. Mindfulness developed my awareness, while conscious autosuggestion guided my unconscious mind. And this worked very well. Then one day, I went through a very painful breakup, which triggered many negative thoughts and emotions. Faced with this suffering, I felt the need to read Eckhart Tolle again, the author I mentioned in my video about mindfulness. To stop creating and feeding mental suffering, Tolle recommends returning to the present moment by accepting difficult situations when we can no longer change them. In other words, by letting go. But sometimes, a situation simply cannot be accepted right away. In those cases, Tolle advises us to accept the suffering itself instead of fighting it. Since I couldn't accept the breakup, that's what I did. Through mindfulness meditation, I was able to accept my suffering and dissolve it. But the effects didn't last. The unwanted thoughts came back, and so did the suffering. This went on for a while. Then one morning, I remembered an idea from Tolle. He says that, contrary to what we tend to believe, suffering never comes from the situation itself, but from our unconscious resistance to that situation. So, even though my conscious mind knew it was over, I was suffering because my unconscious mind was still resisting the breakup. This reminded me of Émile Coué's theory that our unconscious mind always overpowers our conscious will. So I tried removing this resistance with a conscious autosuggestion phrase inspired by Tolle. I accept that it's over with her. Then I followed the protocol recommended by Coué, repeating this phrase 20 times, morning and evening. What happened next really surprised me by its intensity. My unconscious mind quickly absorbed the idea. The unwanted thoughts decreased. The negative emotions disappeared. And for several days, I even felt deeply joyful. I was amazed to discover this key to freeing myself from mental suffering. It meant that mindfulness and conscious autosuggestion were not only complementary, they could also work in synergy. After that, I combined conscious autosuggestion with Tolle's other teachings. Each time, I found it much easier to access and remain in a state of mindfulness. Yet neither Tolle nor Coué ever mentioned this synergy. And despite my research, I found no publication describing it. This isn't entirely surprising. Conscious autosuggestion has largely been ridiculed rather than seriously studied since Coué's death, while mindfulness reached the West much later. So this synergy may appear to be new, but I believe it has actually been used for a very long time, in a completely different form. As we saw in my previous videos, Tolle showed that mindfulness can be understood as a secular way of accessing what some people call God. And I have suggested that conscious autosuggestion can be understood as a secular version of a practice found in all major religions: prayer. I therefore believe that this synergy, what I call MAJi, could be the psycho-spiritual mechanism at the very heart of religions. Freed from any religious framework, this mechanism would be far more accessible, with no required beliefs, rituals, or supernatural explanations. This idea may surprise or even disturb some people, but I believe it is plausible and solid enough for its considerable potential for physical and mental health to be taken seriously and studied scientifically. So now you know what MAJi is, how it works, and why it can profoundly change our access to mindfulness. Just keep in mind that, like its two components, it cannot really be understood intellectually. It has to be experienced, and there is much more that I haven't covered in these videos. You'll find more content in my book and on my website, including what I call the magic formulas, which I developed to make it easier to access and remain in a state of mindfulness. Thank you for watching.
Merci pour votre attention.